Welcome to The Story Behind the Symptoms, a podcast from symptomatic.me. Your host is David Clarke, MD, a board-certified gastroenterologist who successfully diagnosed and treated over 7,000 patients with neuroplastic pain or illness. Each episode, we dive into our guests' life experiences to uncover the deeper causes of their symptoms. By listening to their story, you will gain insights that advance your own journey towards knowledge that becomes healing.
Well, hello, and welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms podcast. I'm Dr. David Clarke, your host, president of the Association for Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms. And what we do in this podcast is we talk to people who have suffered those symptoms and try to understand why they came on and how they were overcome. And my guest today is Aoife, who is from Ireland, living elsewhere these days, but someone whom I know from interviewing in the past. And Aoife, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, everyone, and Dr. Dave Clarke. So nice to see you again. Yeah, my name is Aoife, and I am a mind-body coach now. And how I help my clients, mostly I work with sensitive women. How I help my clients is I teach them the tools that I use to clamber my way out of 30 years of multiple diagnosis and severely debilitating symptoms. So yeah, I'm just so excited to be here with you today and to share the journey and insights and tools that can inspire or help anyone to find their way out also.
Yeah, there is so much ground that we can cover today, but we'll just take it step by step. And why don't we begin with the symptoms that you had right from the start?
Great place to start. So when I was very young, like 3 and 4 years old, I used to complain of a sore tummy. And that was kind of one of my main symptoms. I used to have severe candida outbreaks as well. So everything was, very much pointed to the digestive system. All the consultants and doctors and healers and alternative practitioners I was going to at the time were all naturally very focused on what I was eating and what was going into my stomach. And that started from very early on. It started a journey of focusing on food as the trigger for that symptom. But I had another quite severe symptom from a very young age. In the medical community, it's called pyrexia of unknown origin. And I would basically start to shiver and get the symptoms of a fever. And I would get aches and pains throughout my body, like flu, and I would be shivering and I would run a very high fever. But there was no virus or no bacteria or no apparent reason for these symptoms. So I did get diagnosed with pyrexia of unknown origin, which just means we don't know why this is happening. And so I had the tummy aches and then I had the fevers. So from the get-go, I had health problems that were very much disrupting my life experience. Some other things that are noticeable were, like when I got the chicken pox, when you're a kid, you're supposed to get the chicken pox so you get them out of the way. So I would get them worse than the other kids. The other kids might get a few spots and I would get them worse. And I got cold sores from a young age, but for me, they went right up my nose and grew up my face. And so it was as if also my immune system was compromised because things that other children were experiencing, maybe I was experiencing a little worse. So yeah, they were the main physical symptoms as a child that I was experiencing. So we moved country. I was born in London, in East London. And as you do, your first 7 years of your life, you have this is your world. And we had a community of friends and whatever there. But my parents were Irish. So we moved then to Ireland. And that Christmas, I don't know what month of the year it was when we actually made the move, but that Christmas, I got a fever. It was Christmas Eve and it ran dangerously high. I remember my parents putting me in a cold bath and ringing the hospital. So here I am having, for no apparent reason, unexplained fevers. So I ran that really, really high fever, and that led then the the top pediatrician in Ireland at the time to take me on as a patient and admitted me into hospital for 7 days, I think, and ran all these different tests, blood tests and breathing into things tests, getting my whole body scanned and x-rayed and everything. And then when I was let out of hospital, there was weeks went by. I used to get routine blood tests. And at the end of all of that, he diagnosed me as mystery girl. So that's on my medical report and said that I would grow out of it.
Yeah, well, they hoped you would grow out of it, but it is remarkable. I don't think I have personally ever seen anyone develop a fever as a mind-body reaction, but the capacity of the mind to produce physical symptoms in the body is remarkable. It is certainly beyond what I was trained to believe in early on, but in the course of my career, I've seen remarkable levels of symptoms develop from this. People who've watched me speak before know about a patient who was moving her bowels once a month, another patient whose stomach, the organ, not the abdomen, was completely paralyzed, wasn't emptying anything at all. Patients who've been in so much pain they were in hospital with morphine around the clock. Patients with symptoms for decades. It's just stunning, the level of illness and debility that can develop from the mind. So tell us, how things progressed from there. I mean, because I know your symptoms went on for decades.
They did. They kept going. So the thought then was, she'll probably grow out of it. She's 7 years old, like maybe, whatever they were thinking. I think the instruction to my parents was ignore it and she'll grow out better.
Your doctors were focusing on finding a organ disease or a structural damage to explain your condition, and they weren't looking outside of that box. That was certainly the box that I was trained in. If you've got pain or illness, it's got to be a disease or injury going on somewhere. We keep focusing on that. Nobody was asking you about what was happening in your life or how you were doing emotionally anywhere along the way.
Certainly. And the interesting thing with the period pain, it was just the same, like you said, kind of model. I then ended up having scans like I did when I was a child, having the scans and the x-rays. And now it was on my womb and my ovaries and the scans and the x-rays and all these different tests and specialists. And again, nothing was found. So I was given kind of weird advice. Like one doctor told me to have babies young, that would resolve the issues.
Well, there's an easy solution.
Considering I was 14 years old, I don't know if it was the best advice, but luckily I wasn't taking advice like that at the time. But the thing for me was that it was another unexplained symptom, really. So with the childhood stuff, they said, oh, she'll grow out of it. And then with the hormonal, with this stuff, they also said, oh, you'll grow out of it. Okay. It's just hormonal. You're a teenager. You'll grow out of it. So it was kind of like pushed aside. And like you said, no other parts of my life were really being questioned or, inquired about. So the thing is, I didn't grow out of the period pain, and I, even though my fevers, I didn't grow out of the stomach pain either. That was carrying on. It was getting worse. And even though the actual fevers went, I still had the symptoms of fevers. I would get dark rings under my eyes. I would start to shiver, get aches and pains throughout my body. I would have flu-like symptoms, but I didn't have the actual fever anymore. So I was still carrying these symptoms, and I was collecting more. And that's really how it just kept going. Then in my early 20s, I was partying a lot. It was probably not that unusual for an Irish person to be, at the time anyway, drinking and partying. And I guess I realize now that was taking the edge off a lot of things for me, emotional and physical. But I decided when I was 24, 25, right, I'm going to clean up my act. I'm going to get serious. I'm going to really get back into my health issues. And when I did that and I stopped drinking and partying, I actually got worse because I kind of didn't have these things. And I remember people coming to see me and they say, wow, you're not eating gluten, you're not eating sugar, you're not drinking alcohol, you must feel so good. And I'm like, I really don't. I have all these aches and pains throughout my body. Then eventually I got the diagnosis of fibromyalgia. You're muted.
The alcohol and the partying are forms of self-treatment. They're when you don't have anything else you can do to alleviate your physical or emotional symptoms. Alcohol and partying and drugs, and those are all ways that people medicate themselves to try to feel at least a little bit better, even knowing that they have consequences. Obviously, they're not the best, but when you've got no alternatives that you can tell, then it's understandable you would resort to that. And, when you suddenly take that away, you're essentially taking away your self-treatment. Not too surprising that you're going to feel worse, both physically and mentally.
If you find this podcast is helpful, you can help thousands of others like you to find this information if you take a moment and leave a 5-star review. Thank you.
Exactly. That was my experience. And of course, now looking back, I know I had these, tendencies to be extremely hard on myself and extremely disciplined. So that was all playing out once I took the drugs and alcohol and partying away. And eventually I got my diagnosis of fibromyalgia. And I think I said this to you before in our last interview, but I initially was really happy that I finally had a word after a lifetime of unexplained fevers and unexplained stomach pains and unexplained period pain. And just like an unexplained experience, everything. I was like, oh, a word. I can finally tell people why I can't show up and why I'm stuck in bed and why I'm in so much pain. And I can meet other people who maybe have healed from this and they talk the same as me. And it was not to be the case, of course, because I met another dead end where it was just a word that also meant unexplained. Situation.
Yeah. And your symptoms went well beyond the definition of fibromyalgia. And I think during that period of time, you also became severely depressed.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the depression was always there from a really young age, and the anxiety. And of course, when I was partying a lot, I just thought like during the week I'm anxious and depressed because I'm partying too much on the weekends. But when I stopped partying, it was the depression got so severe and I was just looking for answers for so long. So just say I was like 25, I stopped partying, started meditating and doing all these different health practices and doing therapy as well. And I was really, really suffering with the depression. But by the time I got the fibromyalgia diagnosis 28, by the time I got to 2016, 2017, and I was 31 years old, I was done. It was too much to take. Like I was not getting better. Like after all that time, and I had been to gynecologists and psychologists and healers in Australia and England and Ireland. I had been to Tibetan healers and Chinese herbalists and every homeopathic practitioner and all. I had just done everything, and psychiatrists and the medication and the psychoanalysis. And the gluten-free, like I was maxed out, dude. Like I was just like, I've done inner work, I've done meditation, I spoke to psychiatrists, it was a desperate place to be, and to be in so much pain. I was on disability at that point, disability benefits. I wasn't able to work. The panic was so wild, and just the daily thoughts. I knew I would never act on suicidal ideation, but like as I was crying before I opened my eyes in the morning, I just was like, this is such a desperate position I'm in. Like, nobody in the entire world is able to help me. And I had never heard a recovery story at that point. Not one.
It's really striking that this condition, neuroplastic symptoms, we call it today, has afflicted 20% of the adult population, and it's qualitatively different in the treatment that it needs than traditional mental health psychotherapy. there needs to be focus on the issues that can cause physical symptoms as opposed to mental health symptoms. And the ability to actually have a goal of relieving those symptoms is something that's new in that the neuroplastic psychotherapy offers. And we're going after emotions, we're going after the long-term effects of childhood trauma, we're going after personality traits and triggers, and we'll talk about some of those things. But for a form of psychotherapy that can offer tremendous benefits to 20% of the adult population, and for it not to be widely available, I mean, that's why my nonprofit exists, is to teach as many people as we can, whether they're healthcare professionals or not, how to do this. Was there anything about the psychological care that you received that provided something for you, that resonated for you, or that gave you some insight before you found the neuroplastic approach?
I'm going to say that everything I did positioned me well for the moment I found the mind-body connection to work well for me, whether that's the fact that it's just a contrast. I knew that all these things, certain things didn't work. And then, I had been studying Tibetan meditation and doing a lot of inner work. So maybe there was just a lot of me that was open, but I can tell you for sure that I did not have 1 second of relief until I found the mind-body connection and this particular angle of approaching everything.
All right. Well, let's take this conversation to a happier place here and tell us about, how you found this information that was finally helpful to you, and what kinds of insights it gave you that were valuable, and what happened to your symptoms after that, and what was different about it for you that was enabled it to work where nothing had worked before.
I want to say one thing that was different because I found the Curable app and I listened to just a couple of pain science lessons by, maybe it was Dr. Schubiner and Dr. Strax. And I want to say that the way they were delivering the information was very accessible to me. It was being delivered with, it had a softness to it. It meant they were speaking from their own experience as well. And that kind of bridged a gap for me, whereas maybe in the past, some people had mentioned maybe there was an emotional connection to my symptoms, but it came from maybe more of a disconnected place. So I do want to say that made a difference. But for me, when I had spent those first 30 years of my life being told I was a mystery and a complicated case, and by that stage I had so many symptoms with my wrists and my stomach and my sleep and my mental and emotional, I felt like a mess. I felt like an absolute mess of a human, broken. Like even the Chinese acupuncturists would be like, wow, you're such a complicated case. Everyone just was overwhelmed by me, just, I don't know, put her in a special ward where no one wants to deal with her, right? But when I heard this 5-minute talk, it literally put those 120 mysterious problems in one tiny little neat box for me. And that already, I'd been carrying this heavy burden my whole life. That immediately put that burden to the side. And for me, I understood that I didn't have a million problems, mental, emotional, physical, wrist, stomach, I had only one problem. My nervous system was in a state of stress. So all I had to focus on, and that was like a quantum leap for me.
Yeah, it's huge. It's so reassuring to people when they finally are given a diagnosis that makes sense. The uncertainty about what's going on is so much worse. It adds to the burden of stress that just contributes to the symptoms all the more. And to finally have a diagnosis that makes sense, and it certainly resonates for me, the impression you had that the people talking about the neuroscience were very calm and straightforward about it, because we don't have to, jump up and down and shout from the rooftops about this, because we've seen it work for thousands of people. So we just, explain what we have observed, and it resonates for people when we do that. So evidently, it started to alleviate your symptoms. How were you able to make use of this information to make changes that led to relief.
As a nonprofit, we depend on members to stay in business. In return, we provide pricing advantages and services you can't find anywhere else. And if you use the discount code STORY in lowercase, you can join for the first month for $3. Thank you.
So at the time, there was a long list. There was a long list of food that I couldn't eat. I had a severe reaction to. So just a small group of foods I could eat, and only at certain times in the day. I was living in this hyper managing my environment to avoid a flare up kind of situation. So I heard the pain science lesson. It all made sense to me, and I bought Dr. Schubiner's book and Dr. Sarno's book, The Divided Mind. And I just spent about 2 weeks, and this is the only information I would consume. And I just waited until this kind of spontaneous moment where I felt assured enough to experiment with the food. And I walked to my local shop and I got some Mars ice creams and some Guinness, which were things I hadn't dared to eat for over 6 years. And I ate them, and then I went to a friend's house for her birthday, and I showed up with the Mars and the Guinness, and everyone's like, what? And they were cooking lasagna, and I was like, hey, I'll have a plate of lasagna. Everyone's like, what? And I made it into a very fun experiment for myself. But from then on, I have not had any IBS or stomach problems from that moment, having spent all my life identifying and like talking about, and just having that been such a predominant experience for my day-to-day life.
What was the key idea? What shifted psychologically for you that enabled these changes, and remarkable changes in your body to happen? Was it just simply knowing that this was a stress reaction in your body and that you could shift your attention from your body to maybe working on the stress? Because that's a common phenomenon in our treatment approach.
Yeah, so that particular breakthrough that I had was kind of like, I just overrode the whole program, because I really realized that this whole narrative about all the food was not where it was at. And I really realized that my stomach and my digestive system was fine. And so that was the shift, and that's how I had that breakthrough with that particular symptom. But for sure, it wasn't like I was healed from everything and that was it. I did still have to work at all the underlying things that were fueling my symptoms. That I did experience a lot of insomnia and other symptoms after that. But for me, that was the proof that this was really all I needed to focus on moving forward. So the shift for me was more like a surrender. It was more like a relief. It was just like, wow, I've been living in this hyper world of external triggers and management. And it was just like, I can let this go. It wasn't like so much of an intellectual breakthrough. It was just more like, can I really let this go? And like just being more free with my experience of eating. And I guess I had digested enough information that the fear and the uncertainty had been reduced enough. And this I always say with my clients when they're like, when can I break free from a trigger or whatever? I always say like to wait for a moment of spontaneity and have a bit of fun with it, because that really worked for me, was to feel like, wow, I can let go of this whole world. And what would it look like to be free?
Okay.
Yeah.
So some of my patients are, one of the things that they break free from is they are very focused on the needs of other people in their lives, whether it's in their personal lives or their workplace. They are kind of outer directed. They're not really putting themselves on the list of people they take care of. It's a focus on so many other people that they're living lives as if on a treadmill they never step off. Was that a characteristic you had, or?
So yeah, oh my God, yeah. This is this is really having the breakthrough and realizing that this really works. That gave me the focus. Okay, go all in on this mind body journey. And then it was just like this unfolding of these layers that became obvious. Like, this is the reason that my body has been in so much stress. And I was absolutely someone who was self-sacrificing all of the time I had silenced my own needs so much that I didn't even know what they were. And I was super focused on other people's needs around me and caretaking other people and being also like managing other people to kind of like protect myself. So yeah, that very outward experience, I was definitely doing that, the people pleasing, and starting to make the connection to that. And my health was a massive breakthrough.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very important shift. And another common, highly stressful personality trait that many of my patients have was that their self-esteem was not the best. Their belief in themselves, their quality, whether they were valuable human beings, was below where it should have been. Was that an issue for you at all?
Oh, yeah. Well, if you put together, like, first of all, if you have been living a life where you've been experiencing debilitating symptoms that aren't really explained or aren't really acknowledged, that is going to add to like your low self-worth. And then, a lot of the qualities that I now know are my superpowers, like being a really sensitive person and being empathic. And a lot of these qualities also just like culturally are not celebrated. So growing up as a sensitive, empathic child, it was more celebrated if you were kind of more invulnerable and tough, right? So I really like put on this like tough exterior and buried down all these parts of myself that are really special and unique to me and really valuable. So I like buried them all down and I put on all these different masks. And that made me feel really shitty then, because I was proving and pushing and didn't believe that who I authentically was not only like good enough, but could thrive in the world or could be loved or liked. So yeah, I was kind of like living with a lot of masks.
So even to the point of the belief that the real Aoife would not be worthy of being loved, did it go as far as that?
Definitely. Yeah, I didn't even know the real Aoife, to be honest. Like, she always like so pushed right down, and I was so used to like living off these these boxes that I had, maybe like getting the feedback, getting praise, maybe for caretaking people, getting praise for achievements like that I thought would be good, look good, but weren't really what I wanted. So I didn't really know the real Aoife.
Okay. And you've been alluding to where some of those ideas might have come from, and that's extremely important. Before we get to that, I had one other area I wanted to explore, which is the burying of the emotions. Many of my patients bury their negative emotions, especially anger, sometimes fear, shame, grief, or guilt. But when the anger is buried, at least in some people, it can sometimes get triggered. It can sometimes just burst out for little or no reason. And my patients are often mystified about why these outbursts occur. Not everybody has them, but I'm curious whether you experience that, where you would be suddenly very angry about something and really without much reason. Did that ever happen to you?
Yes. So people might have met me and thought I was a very laid back person. And I think I used to also tell people I was really laid back, and I would be able to be laid back and not care about things for a certain amount of time. But really, I was just burying it all down. And then I would explode, and I would either be like really volatile with maybe like my brothers, or I would suddenly fall out with a friend and then hold a grudge. Like, I just had no safety or tools or process for experiencing day-to-day emotions. And so my default system was to push it all down and just be chill, be cool until I exploded, and there would be resentment and there would be a fallout, and then there would be shame and there would be guilt. But I had no way out of that. Even despite the studying Tibetan meditation and doing lots of therapy, I still was stuck in that system.
Yeah, that's it doesn't happen to all of my patients, but it's very common that things have happened that cause people to have to internalize a lot of anger. Many of my patients are like dormant volcanoes on the outside and boiling magma on the inside, and sometimes they are able to keep the boiling magma completely covered up, and other times it kind of erupts from time to time for sometimes little or no reason. But that anger, if it's not erupting, it can be manifested in the body in the form of symptoms. So, it's trying to find some way to express itself, and through the body in the form of symptoms is a common way. It takes something very powerful to produce what you have just described through this entire interview. When I try to trace the roots of that, I can usually find it in someone's childhood experience, which sometimes was very clearly bad, but in other circumstances, it wasn't clearly bad at all. And it can even be when people in the family are all doing the best they can. There can still be pressures on a child that can lead to significant problems later on. And when the person as an adult looks back, they don't necessarily appreciate just how much pressure they were under. But I wonder if you can describe anything you experienced that might have led to some of these personality characteristics you've described, or any kind of circumstances that you wouldn't want for a child of your own or a niece or nephew of your own. And maybe we can understand a little better what led to what here.
Definitely. Well, I know I was an extremely sensitive child, and I was likely picking up on, whatever chaos is in a family home with 3 young children. And when I was picking up on the chaos maybe around me, I was internalizing it in that, okay, if I just be good, if I just don't make a noise, if I don't be any trouble, then
If
maybe
you be the perfect child.
right. So that is when that leads to me silencing my needs, like I was mentioning earlier. So I learned, I decided I'll silence my needs and I'll just be this perfect child, or this non-human expression of a human, and that might manage this circumstance. And that definitely that disassociated me from my needs, and that it immediately created a stressful environment for my body and a huge amount of pressure. So, I remember as a child, I often tell my clients this story, but I was in the bank with my auntie and my uncle, and I had needed to go to the toilet for so long, to the point that I ended up weighing myself in the queue, and I had to tell my auntie, and she said, "Why didn't you tell us that you needed to go to the toilet for so long?" That's how much I had silenced my needs, is how much I was trying to not be a bother. So that is something that, and because I was so sensitive, I could pick up on subtleties and stresses that maybe were happening around me. So that's definitely something that created a lot of stress and pressure within me.
And were you trying to solve those stresses and pressures that you saw around you, not the ones that you had internally in yourself, but the ones that were in the family? Were you a problem solver in that way?
I guess so, yeah. I would caretake my parents maybe, and my little brother, and I definitely got a feedback loop of when I'm taking care. So I was on the one hand silencing my needs and creating maybe what I thought was creating a calmness in maybe the chaos. But another thing I was doing was caretaking, helping to caretake others, and I was getting a feedback loop, right, of praise for this. So I was definitely adding up to silencing my needs and then looking after others, and that was created a feedback loop of that environment, which is not a sustainable way to live.
Yeah, not at all. And it's a source of low self-esteem. You are, for whatever reason, being made to feel like your own needs are not as important as those of others. And that means, if your needs aren't as important as others, that means that you are not as important as others. And that's a crushing burden to try to carry for a small child, for anybody, but especially for a small child. And you absorb that. People absorb that as a basic assumption about who they are. And when that assumption is taken on at such a young age, it just becomes a part of you. It feels natural that you should be less worthy than other people. It can also lead, and this may or may not have happened to you, but as an adult, many of my patients found themselves in close personal relationships or romantic relationships with people who had needs, people who had problems or issues that needed support. My patients would then, just as they had done as children, they would focus on providing support, trying to fix the problems, trying to alleviate the issues, and the relationships then become quite unbalanced. And it can be very difficult to find yourself in a healthy relationship if you have the attitude or the habit or the belief that it's your purpose and job in life to support others. Was that part of your experience at all?
That was so part of my experience, and part of the deeper layer of healing that I've been peeling layers back on this for years, and noticing how I would get into relationships or even friendships where someone needs me and I would make myself available, and that there would be a sense of connection or security through this kind of exchange. Which always led to that buildup of pressure and maybe a lack of reciprocity of what I was maybe giving. So yeah, the way that I learned to be in relationship is massively a part of what was generating so much tension and stress throughout my body.
Yeah, and it's been a big part of my treatment approach to patients to help them recognize the heroic perseverance they had to have to get through their childhood experience. When you are negating your own needs, that's enormously difficult. I want my patients to appreciate just how difficult that was. It's hard when you look back at your own life. You don't have anything in parallel to compare it with. But if you can appreciate that you were carrying a huge burden at that time that stayed with you for years, that can help people appreciate themselves more. So I'm wondering how you have fared on that particular aspect of the journey. Has your self-esteem grown to what you would think of as an appropriate level today?
Yes, and a tool similar to what you said you use with your patients. You said you kind of like gave them a sticker of a hero sticker. So changing the narrative that I have about myself is a tool that I use maybe once a year, and it fills me with like a new, fresh energy. It's really, really incredibly simple. It's not a fake it till you make it. It's not like I am strong, I am confident. It's literally what I call like plugging out from a narrative that was based on complete untruths, and plugging into your real power as a unique expression of yourself, whether it's the resilience of what you've been through, or whether it's tuning back into like what is so valuable about you as a person. So for me, like seeing that I'm sensitive and empathic, and certain things that I had deemed as useless or whatever. So just really plugging into those also, and really infusing myself with a new narrative, because whether you realize it or not, you have a narrative about yourself, and it's likely if you've been silencing your needs and experience a period of time with these kinds of symptoms and maybe relationship dynamics as well, you likely that narrative is not a good one, and it's also a completely untrue one. So plugging out from that and plugging in it's something, it's like I refresh it maybe once a year, and it gives me this so much energy. I've done this tool with clients on a call, and they have literally experienced their symptoms like disappear or reduce in that minute. It's like, and one of my clients said the other day when we were talking about this tool, she said it's like you meet yourself for the first time.
Yes. It's not just an affirmation. An affirmation is fine if that's all you have, but it is so much more powerful to re-examine your life and recognize the extraordinary quality that is represented by what you've overcome. I mean, that's changing your perspective to one that is simply more accurate, one that is closer to the truth of what you went through. And so there's a shift from the person who feels like even her own need to go to the bathroom is unworthy of mentioning to somebody who, as you said earlier in this interview, believes correctly that she has superpowers. What a journey it is from that little girl in the bank to the woman today who has superpowers and knows in her soul that she has them. That's just a remarkable journey, and it's all connected to the journey of overcoming these symptoms. That's one of those, you've seen this in your own clients, one of the wonderful parts of this work is that in parallel with alleviating the pain and illness, we change people's lives. We change how they think about themselves. And it's, I can't think of it as a side effect because they are just so interlaced together. But it's, stunning the level of turnaround that you have achieved. When I think back to you as a girl, as a teenager, as someone in her 20s who was just so devastatingly depressed and had such poor image of herself, to the person you are today and able to use this knowledge to help others, it's remarkable.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it is. And even though it's the tools that we talk about and that I like to use, they're so simple, it can be, a kind of scary journey as well, letting go of that old world and that old system, like unplugging from that old system of the ways that you had found security in relationships through like overgiving and it can be a little bit of a adventure anyway, going through those layers of healing, but it's so enriching, and like you said, like when back in 2017, all I wanted was my symptoms to go away, and what I've gotten from this is just so far greater than simply a relief, a pain relief, or symptom relief. It's really, and continues to, I just use the same system, the same tools continually to grow my business, to grow my, to move countries, to enrich my relationships. And it continues to be, just such a rich experience, which is what I'm most grateful for. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's not like these concepts require, a decade of psychological training and, 10 years of analytic experience. Neither of us has formal credentials in psychology, and yet we have been able to learn these concepts and apply them successfully to clients and seen people make remarkable changes. Many of them, people who have been to traditional, say, cognitive behavioral psychotherapy or other forms of traditional psychotherapy that haven't addressed the underlying issues that we're talking about today, and they don't make progress. I sent many of my early patients for mental health care, and it wasn't appropriate to this particular set of issues. And so they would come back and they would say, I'm still having my physical symptoms. What can we do now? And I was very lucky. I had a framework from the psychiatrist at UCLA that I could use to begin to help them. And I learned from that interaction with hundreds and then thousands of patients. And I didn't have the advantage of going through this myself, but you could take your own personal experience and apply it so successfully to patients. It's just a wonderful thing to see.
Thank you. Well, do you know what I was thinking as well recently is that the symptoms are so clever and they're doing such a good job at hiding. They're hiding a little world, a little world. So no matter how much emotional or inner work I did, as long as the symptoms were still cleverly just hiding this little pocket of this world for me, a portal, let's call it a portal, then it wasn't until I found the mind-body connection that was like a key to unlocking that portal. And it was like, that is when that whole world opened up to me, that whole emotional and the historical inner world that was really in a state of turmoil and stress. And it was really what was behind the symptoms.
Yeah, you begin to see that the symptoms are actually a form of communication, that your mind is trying to tell you something, that it's not happy about something in your life, or sometimes more than one thing. But once you start to see the symptoms as an indication of a distress that's going on in your mind, you can begin to think about, well, what might that be? And you can then begin to address the real source of the problems, or as we say on this podcast, the story behind the symptoms. Well, this has been tremendously insightful and enlightening, and I am so grateful to you for coming on to this podcast and sharing your story and the wisdom that you have derived from it. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience, or any questions that you have for me before we close?
Well, I would love for anyone listening to be open and to reach out. I know for me, when I first found the mind-body teaching, a lot of my symptoms weren't talked about. For instance, period pain. It was a lot about back pain and specific symptoms. And I would just love for anyone to reach out and give it a try, and don't feel like if we didn't, or if no one's talking about your specific circumstances, that you don't have an opportunity to also increase your well-being by this approach. That is what I would love to put out there into the world.
Yeah, that's so important. Any symptom that does not have a clear explanation in an organ disease or structural damage, or any symptom that is not responding to treatment in the way that the physician expects, then just to get a complete evaluation, you should look into the sources of stress in your life. The 12-question quiz on symptomatic.me is a great place to start. And once you start looking into these areas, you're going to find things. Sometimes issues that you didn't expect, sometimes childhood concerns that were actually bigger than you recognize. But it's the first step on a journey not only toward healing the physical symptoms, but toward making major life changes for the better. Thank you so much, Aoife. I just happened to see the other day that in Irish legend, Aoife was a warrior princess, and there's no question that you were appropriately named.
Thank you so much. I absolutely love our meetings, Dr. Dave Clarke. And just thank you for everything you've put out into the world and for all of these conversations that I get to have with you.
Thank you.